Namaskar. By the by the grace of Bhagwan Sri Ramchandra, Mother Sita, I take up this noble and huge project of presenting before you Valmiki Ramayan in English. As we proceed, we'll be discussing more of it. First of all, the pranam mantra for this sacred work. Om Ramaya Ramchandraya Ramabhadraya Vedase Raghunathaya Nathaya Sitaya Pataye Namaha. Valmiki Ramayan, as some of you might be knowing, was composed by the great sage Valmiki, who is also respectfully addressed as the first poet, Adi Kavya. And it said that he composed it in 24,000 verses. And the version that has come down to us, Valmiki lived maybe 4,000 years ago, or maybe more. Only the historians can say for sure. So naturally, his disciples preserved it, and maybe they did a bit of editing this, that. As we proceed, we will see some of it. But of course, the core was never touched. It begins the version that has come down to us, because it's very clear that the narration in the beginning is by his disciples. It's very clear. It begins with Om Tapa Swadhyaya Niratam Tapasvi Vaga Vidam Varam Naradam Pari Pracha Valmikir Muni Pungavam. It says that there was this great sage Valmiki who was engaged in and totally devoted to the study of the Vedas. Study implies teaching too. And in tapasya, tapasya is generally translated as austerities, but tapasya should be translated only as tapasya, because tapasya has a very special meaning. Tapasya means that when you take up one ideal, some ideal, and then you devote your entire life towards it till you attain it. So, to give you an example, sages wanted to have, say, self-knowledge, Atma-gyan, knowledge of Atman. So they performed tapasya. God wanted to create. He did tapasya. Their tapasya means knowledge. And sometimes someone wants some favor from God, some favor from life. I said that he or she is performing tapasya, like bringing up a kid. It's a tapasya. So that is what sage Valmiki was. And it so happened that once he met the great sage Narada. More of it as we proceed. And he asked, for whatever reason, Kon vasmin sampratam loke gunavan kasya viryavan dharmagyascha kritagyascha satyavakyo dhravrata. You will note that Sanskrit in Valmiki Ramayan is very easy and very simple. If you know any of the Indian languages, just any of the Indian languages, and try reading it, you won't have any difficulty understanding it. It says, O great sage Narada, in the present times, can you name a person who is full of qualities, vigor, and established in Dharma, the right way of living? One who remembers the obligations that he had and truthful. And as we proceed, we will see one of the statements that comes that gets repeated is Ramo Durnabi Bhasata. Bhasata. Ram does not indulge in double speak. Like if he says something, he sticks to it. And Dृढ़ Pratigya. Dृढ़ Pratigya means one who holds on to whatever words he give. That is, he makes a promise, stays true to it. Charitreణ chako yukta sarvabhutesu kohita. Who is he who is established in character and yet always engaged in doing good to the others? Vidwan ka samarthascha kaschaika priyadarsana. And must be very good looking, is questioning, capable, learned. I mean, when you think of these qualities, can't imagine someone having these qualities, one single person. Atmavan ko jitak krodho. Such a person must have complete control over his anger. Anger is actually a sign of weakness. Most times we don't realize it, but it's a sign of weakness. And Atmavan, he has a complete control over his mind also. Dutiman ko anasuya kaha. His personality is very powerful, dazzling. And he never criticizes anyone. And yet, when he gets angry during a war, during a battle, even the gods would be scared of him. That was valorous. So I'm pretty curious. Valmiki tells Narada, that do you know of any person who has all these qualities? As you can make out, it's absolutely unusual to have all these qualities in one person. And Narada responds with, well, what you have asked for, the qualities that you expect, is so rare in the world. What to say of all the qualities? You rarely find a person who has even one or two of these qualities. But yes, thinking over, cogitating over it, I can tell that yes, in Ikshwaku is a dynasty, there is Sri Rama, who has all these qualities that you asked for. He's valorous, full of valor, personality is dazzling, extremely patient, and has complete control over his senses, etc. And then Narada goes on explaining how are his physical features, etc. And here we take a break from the description because most of you must be knowing the basic personality, the basic story of Ramayana, because Ramayana story is so popular all around, starting from our childhood days where one reads Amar Chitra Katha to TV serial to this and that. And we'll be coming back to that. But this series of talks where we would be explaining Valmiki Ramayana, it is meant to give us a deeper analysis and to take the listeners into the depth of this subject. Now, before we proceed, let me tell you a very interesting incident that happened with me. One of my very good friends is a retired IS officer, Indian Administrative Service, the highest job that we have in India, bureaucratic job. So the gentleman, Mr. Naik, had to undergo a lot of suffering during his time because I know him very well and die hard honest, extremely efficient, etc. But because of various circumstances, and as happens with most of us, that situation is not within our control. And the situation was not under his control. And his masters, they turned against him and tried to go all out for him. So much later, of course, I knew throughout what was happening. Much later, he casually mentioned, let's see, when he was going through all that, somehow he always remembered the life of Sri Rama, our great incarnation of Lord Vishnu, Sri Rama, and always thought, let's see, how Sri Rama had to undergo so much of suffering in his life, spending 14 years in the forest for no fault of his. Mother Sita, his wife, divine consort, getting kidnapped by Ravana, then losing his father untimely, and then had to send his wife to exile. So he used to think like that. And somehow that always gave him strength. See, if my own Ishta, if my own Lord suffered so much, well, I too can do it. Now that's a very interesting thing because the story of Sri Ramchandra has a direct bearing on our life, as narrated in the story of say Mr. Naik. How it happened? How it is possible that someone who lived maybe 4,000 years ago or more, or the great epic. Epic actually has a different connotation in English. Here we call it Kavya, and better still Itihasa, sacred sacred book. How is it that Ramayana could give strength to somebody like this? See, nowadays it has become extremely popular to say that this person has inspired me, this book has inspired me. And these are all just big words, big talks. All these books, as they talk about life philosophy and positivity, etc., you read these books and you forget them. And when the time comes to apply those principles, we invariably fail miserably. I'm sure all of you have experienced this. You may be knowing a lot of things naturally, but when it comes to application, because ultimately it's the lived experience. It's a new term, lived experience. I learned some time back. Lived experience. Only when you know somebody who has gone through those experiences, who has faced those problems, that you start deriving strength. Mere words do not help. And worse, if the words are from an ordinary preacher, they are of no use. Words have values, words have value only when it comes from someone truly established in Dharma. Otherwise, what happens? You hear, you applaud, and you walk away. So, how Ramayana could inspire Mr. Naik? Because it is not a mere story. Some years ago, I chanced to read one book known as the Indian Odyssey. Odyssey is a famous work by Homer. And that gentleman, he had written a nice book, as most foreigners try, without understanding the essence, the power that they carry. And he was trying to impress the Western audience or Western readership with the idea that how India has its own Odyssey like story. Come on, Odyssey is something different. Ramayana is entirely different. One whole civilization, that means India, Indian subcontinent, is a full civilization by itself. In spite of the poverty that we have, in spite of the limitations that we have, we are a complete and full and one of the oldest civilizations of the world that is continuing absolutely in the same style as it was, say, 10,000 years ago. Ramayana is not a story, it's not an epic, it's not some great poetic work. It's a scripture, it's a shastra. As we proceed, we shall see more of it. Shastra always means it's a living ideal. There's a difference between ideal and living ideal. See, ideal is somebody talks about some great, say for example, you talk about Alexander, the great warrior, conqueror, Napoleon, etc. Well, they're legends, they're ideals. But Sri Ramchandra is a living ideal. He's alive in the hearts of millions even today. Not with one, not with two, but millions, literally. Particularly if you walk through the Indian mainland. Of course, you cannot confine Sri Ramchandra to this area, that area, although they say that in Hindi belt, because of Ramcharitmanas, Sri Ramchandra is much more popular. But that's true of South India and North India and East India and even Nepal. It's all same everywhere. It's a living ideal. There are hundreds and thousands of sadhus who have given up their everything in the name of Sri Rama. I knew of one IPS, Indian Police Service official, which is again just like IS. It's a very high post in India. He had given up his job and taken up his, dedicated his life towards Sri Rama. And then he had a huge temple constructed. So these are living ideals. Here, it's not about aspiring for something in which many lives will be crushed. It is not about gaining something in the material world. It's not about sucking others so that your own coffers may grow. It's about bearing whatever is coming, whatever the life is offering to you, good or bad, with equanimity. Equanimity. Neither you become too excited about it, nor you become too depressed about it. You will have your tears, you will have your smiles, but there it stops. Equanimity. This idea of equanimity comes repeatedly in Gita. However, when it comes to some living ideal, of course, we have Sri Krishna, no doubt, but Sri Ramchandra is massive. So, being a living ideal, Sri Ramchandra has been a source of inspiration and an ideal for Indians for thousands of years. And it has been so deep in the Indian mindset that just see how the name of the very word Rama The name of Sri Rama has come. When you greet somebody, very often you say Jai Ram Ji Ki, Ram Ram. When you want to start something, take up something, you say Ram. When you finish something, you say Shri Ram, Jai Ram. Do not confuse it with the political slogans. I'm just talking about what people do. When you take up a journey, some activity, when you want to approve something, Shri Ram. And more importantly, if you want to disapprove of something, in South India, it's a very popular thing to say Rama or Rama. Means, oh, I don't approve of it. Ram Ram. It's a very popular way of disapproving something. Again, Jai Sri Ram. Wonderful. How wonderful. My God. See, funerals in most part of India, when somebody is taken for funeral, chanting is Ram Nam Satya Hai. The name of Ram alone is true. And interestingly, I remember as a kid, I was growing up in village, and there, when grains used to be weighed, they would always use Ram. Ramji Ram, Ek Ram Ek, Do Ram Do. Uh, They won't just say one, reminding to oneself, 1, 2, 3, 4, Ram. Amazing. Even that young age, must have been barely 6 or 7 years older. I was surprised. And naming their children after Ram or his numerous names, it's a very common practice in India. Then you have Ram Leela. All over the country, Ram Leela in this form or that form is celebrated. We have books, we have songs, we have films, we have televisions, and enactment, my God, different scenes from the Ramayana. And the characters from Ramayana, they have become the measure of human character. A brother who is fully dedicated, very often compared to Lakshmana or Bharat. Someone serves his masters very well, Mahavir Hanuman. Some wife who is totally dedicated to her husband, Sita. Someone who is vicious, Ravana. Someone who is treacherous, called Bibhishan. So whether it be good or bad, just like that. Difficult task. You say Ram Setu. And it's not only about the ideal, it's paired ideal, like Ram and Sita. Sita Ram, Sita Ram. Oh my God. It's amazing, amazing. What the great sage Valmiki gave India. That's what we will be seeing as we proceed. And please do not be in a hurry to finish the book, because if you want to quickly finish the book, these things are available on the internet, and now with AI and all, it's much easier. What I am presenting before you is how I have experienced spiritual life through Ramayana, and Ramayana through my spiritual life, both. See, for 4,000, 5,000 years, Indian religious life, the daily life, the moral code, ethics, etc., have been shaped by Ramayana. So important, such an important work. I wish that Indians who are residing overseas would listen to these talks to understand in depth what Ramayana has done to India, and also the non-Indians non-Hindus listen to this talk. The problem is people do not have the patience to listen to so much. As far as literature is concerned, it is known as itihas. Now we need to understand this term to understand the nature of the work. The fountainhead of Indian spiritual traditions are the four Vedas. If you are interested, we have these talks on the Vedas in English, Bengali, and Hindi also. You can listen to them. However, the Vedas have their severe limitations in the sense that, although highly exalted, divine, they're slightly difficult to grasp unless you have a great teacher who teaches you personally. For example, if you have translations, you cannot understand anything with the help of your computers, internet, and AI. No, you cannot understand. No, you need a teacher. Unless a teacher personally trains you up, and more importantly, you need to prepare very well to understand the Vedas. That's why it was the practice in earlier times to send young children to various ashramas, to great sages, where they used to stay for decades, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and learn the Vedas, master the Vedas. Now, for a common person, that was not possible, just not possible. Slowly, the Vedas became pretty exclusive, and the religious rites and rituals, they became very complicated. On the other hand, there were popular stories and performances that float in any society. So there was nothing in between. Either you had the Vedas and the Upanishads, or you had popular stories, popularly known as Puranic stories. And the general public was somewhere missing out. And that is when came Valmiki's Ramayana, and later, maybe 1,000 years, 1,500 years later, only the historians can give you the exact date. Vyasa gave us Mahabharata. Now, these two are known as itihas. Literally, itihas means history. However, this is not the history that the way Westerners think. According to Westerners, it's about the dates and partly interpretations, partly narration. And of course, history is always of the victorious. So they write history like that. In India, we feel that of what use a narration be of a king or a queen or a conqueror or a murderer? How is that relevant to me? For example, let's take the case of, say, religion. Why should I be religious? Why should I be spiritual? Whatever it is, unless it is relevant to me. There are very rich people in the world. I've just heard their names. Why should I read about them? How is that relevant to me? I'm a monk, I've given up everything. And they are into the acquisition mode. Why should I even read about them? So it's about relevance. And that's where the Indian masters, they came up with this idea of itihas and Purana. Purana are these stories that are coming out from the most ancient times, and itihas are these two books. They say that there are four aims in life: Dharma, Artha, Kam, Moksha. They liberate you, they free you at four different levels. Artha, it means wealth. When you earn wealth, it frees you from your worldly wants. You are able to eat well, sleep well, stay well, etc. Because you have money. If you don't have money, you can't even eat properly. Calm, fulfillment of desires. They free you from emotional wants. The amount of emotions that each one of us has. We want to shower our affection. We want to shower our love on someone. In turn, we want to be loved. We don't want others to be greater than us. We want that others appreciate us. All these things combined, create complete havoc in our mind. And that is why they said calm. You should have certain objects on whom these desires will be expended and your mind will become free. There's a new term, partner, they say, love partner or whatever. Of course, they are of great use. Similarly, your own children, etc. Any kind of enjoyment that frees your mind, frees, not freezes. And then to become free from unwanted birth in this species or that species, like going to the hell, etc. That is avoided by performing dharma, good acts. So we have these three for common person, dharma, artha, kama. And if you want to get out of the cycle of birth and death, then it's moksha. Dharma, artha, kama, moksha. These four are known as four purusharthas, aim in life. Now, this is something very important. I tell you, I have rarely met anyone outside, of course, my monastic circle, where people are very clear about these purusharthas. Sometimes or other, more than often, I have met ladies who want to get married and talking about having their devotion in Sri Ramakrishna and Mahasarada and all. I feel so annoyed. What exactly you are talking about? For most people, religion and spirituality are becoming escape route from responsibility. You don't want to take up responsibility. You don't want to be responsible to your parents, to yourself, to the society, to your wife, to your children, and you go and hide behind religion. You go and hide behind spirituality. And that's why you suffer. You see, you will be surprised to know that is the suffering is more for so-called religious than the non-religious types. Reason being, most religious people try to shirk their responsibilities in the name of religion. Believe me. Being a teacher, I get many visitors. I get many mails. I know how people are trying to shirking their duties. And that's the main cause of their suffering. At least people who have no faith in religion, etc., they go and fight, they go and do their duty. No, Hindu Dharma is very clear about it. When you are going all out for devotion, when you are going all out for self knowledge, it means your only goal is to get out of this cycle of birth and death. So these ideas of Vedanta and the idea of Aham Brahmasmi, these are meant for people who have completely outgrown their needs and their desires of wealth, any kind of worldly enjoyment, any kind of worldly dependence, any kind of emotional dependence, and any kind of dependence as far as next birth is concerned. These people have to be scared not of death, but of rebirth. Only if you are scared only of rebirth and nothing else in life, that spirituality is meant for. Anyone who says that I am spiritual is being insincere. To be spiritual means to be scared of rebirth. Religion frees you from the fear of wants of any kind. It also frees you from the fear of lowly birth in some species or in some hell. But spirituality frees you from rebirth. See, these things are very important for us to understand. Now, what Itihas does is it teaches us Dharma, Artha, Kam, Moksha, these four ideals, through the stories of the great achievers, great warriors, great kings, legends, etc. So in Ramayana and Mahabharata and Purana, this is what happens. Of course, there is a fundamental difference between Itihas and Purana. In Itihas, the central characters are human beings and the peripheral are the divine. In Purana, it's the reverse. The divine become the central characters and human beings become the peripheral. Otherwise, you cannot differentiate between the two. So, Valmiki's Ramayana belongs to the Itihas tradition. Only two major books were known as Itihas. Valmiki's Ramayana, only Valmiki's Ramayana, not the later Ramayana. And then Vyasdev's Mahabharata, not the TV serials that you see. Because there's a major difference between the two. This Valmiki's Ramayana is also known as first poetry. That's a very important thing because poetry already existed, but that was in the Vedas. And the Vedas are considered to be divine, so they are not really treated as poetry. So, poetry is when words are arranged in certain meters. Now, this tradition was already there in the Vedas, but it was never applied to other kinds of creations, and nobody dared add anything to the Vedas. Now, the popular story about Valmiki is that he was a robber who turned into a sage. He was a Ratnakar and became Valmiki. But no, we don't find even the slightest hint of this in Valmiki Ramayana. In fact, there have been many scholars who have said that no, Ramayana has no mention of this. However, in later Ramayana and later Indian ethos, Ratnakar turning into the sage Valmiki became too popular. For example, you find in Adhyatma Ramayana, which is a very powerful and popular sacred book, the story of Valmiki, who was Ratnakar, a robber. So, but that's not our topic. The story goes as we will see that one day he saw a hunter shooting an arrow at one of the birds of a pair, crouch. And suddenly his heart as if bled in anguish. Those of you who might have read my book Kratu, you will see that there Kratu is a character who never forgets anything, remembers all his births, narrating the story, and their dramatic presentation of this incident is given. The first, the first words that came out that even Valmiki was surprised, and his disciples were pretty great. They said that this should be called shlok. Shlok means Shubha, auspicious. And then hearing from Narada, the character of Sri Ramachandra, he got on to composing the story of Sri Rama in 24,000 verses. Now, 24,000 verses is there. However, the first chapters were added later by the disciples, and the last section, Uttarkanda, was definitely not written by Valmiki, and that contains thousands of verses. Because, as you will see, Valmiki Ramayana was sung by the two sons, twins, Lava and Kush, when Sri Ramchandra was performing Ashwamedh Yagya. We will see it towards the end. And there the story ends because Mother Sita, she prays to Mother Earth that she may enter her because that's from where she had come. And Sri Ramchandra recognizes love and Kush. So it's a tragico comedy story where Sita is lost, children unite with their father, etc., etc. However, the later poets who wrote Ramayana, they made sure to write this Uttarkand. So all those stories about Sri Ramchandra killing a Shudra, Shambhuk and all, no, these are later editions. You don't find that in Valmiki. In fact, Valmiki would have been horrified to know that Sri Ramchandra killed a Shudra simply because of performing some yagya and all. No, because that does not match with the style of Valmiki, as we shall see. Now we find that the text, it's not only a story, it's a huge reference book of mythologies, that means the traditional stories, geography, then duties, philosophies, etc. Valmiki's Ramayana is pretty distinctive because here we find that Valmiki stresses on the need of holding on to one's dharma. Dharma means way of life. Whatever your way of life, what is your way of life? That which you consider yourself to be. That this is my way of life. And others also. Others also know and believe that this is your way of life. For example, there's a military person. Everybody knows that he's a military person. He himself knows. So he has to live up to the standards. Here I am a monk. For me, monastic values, etc., they are primary because I know myself to be a monk, others know myself to be a monk. There is no way that I can get out of it. Sri Ramchandra was a Kshatriya prince. That means essentially a warrior. He had his dharma and he stuck to it. Now in Valmiki Ramayana, you find that, as we saw, it begins with the word tapasya, tapa. The idea of tapasya keeps getting repeated in the work. And you find gods taking part. And as far as I think, Valmiki was during the period when the Upanishads had not yet been composed or definitely had not come into the mainstream. So it was all about yagya, Agni, and pouring oblations to Agni. And as you proceed with Valmiki Ramayana, you find you can clearly get the fragrance of the Vedic period, the smoke rising from the altars of yagya. Interestingly, you don't find the element of moksha. We mentioned about four purusartha. Moksha element is not there because moksha element was emphasized much more in the Mahabharata because of the Upanishads and all. So there are two possibilities. One, that the concept of moksha, as we understand today, or spirituality as it is paraded these days, it was not there. Of course, Valmiki belonged to the tradition of the Vedic sages. So naturally, they did not believe in this moksha thing. They believed in yagya, they believed in higher lokas, they believed in Brahmalok, and that was the mukti for them, that was the highest for them. For what makes it so special? Valmiki Raman. It's about goodness under pressure. See, under normal conditions, we know that the fight between good and the bad, good and evil. And when we were young, when you were young, those of you who know the story of Sri Ramchandra know that we were taught that Rama represents the good, Ravan represents the evil. Yes, no doubt, it's true. But more than that, it's also about how do you perform your duty when you are under pressure. Very difficult. Number two, usually the enemy of goodness is bad, evil. However, very often in our life, ethical dilemma comes, moral conflict comes, where both choices appear correct. As we will see, say, for example, when Sri Ramchandra was instructed to go to the forest, his mother very clearly said, I am mother, I am asking you not to go. So father's instruction is go to the forest. Mother is saying don't go. Now what do you do? How do you decide what to do? Then it said that female should not be hurt. And yet Taraka, she had to be killed. How to handle that? We will find so many such conflicts in Ramayana. Sri Ramchandra holds on to his dharma. And Sri Ramchandra also goes through this moral conflict, leaving a very important message for us. Don't buckle under pressure. You will be judged by your worth depending entirely on how well you performed your duties, how well you remain true to your dharma. Second, whatever choice you make during a moral dilemma, moral conflict, you will be criticized for that. Whatever you make, for example, when Wali was Wali was killed, Wali, he is criticized for that. Well, we'll find why he killed. He had his reasons. When Sita was abandoned, he's criticized for that. But he didn't have any option. There was a moral conflict, as we will see. Or when Agni Pariksha took place. Well, it's we, the worldly minded, we are so attached to our body. We are so attached to our families. We who are so attached to our pleasures and comforts. It is natural for us to pass judgment on the great. It's very natural. You might see all around in the society, etc., etc. Nowadays, you know, this revolting against the establishment. It has become so normal. They love to throw mud at the greats, and this tradition started maybe 100 years or more when suddenly some ideology imported from overseas in the name of equality, in the name of revolt, they started throwing mud and ink at the greats. That's how these things became, they came into mainstream. That Sri Rama did a wrong thing by killing Wali, and Sri Ram did a wrong thing by abandoning Sita. But as we will see, ordinary mortals, who are we to judge what they did? We are such insignificant people morally and as far as strength is concerned compared to those mighty, the titans. Our mind and our speech, they are not even fit to repeat Sri Rama's name. As they say that if you take Sri Rama's name, the ghosts run away. These modern day ghosts, they are criticizing Sri Rama. Imagine. The recurring idea in Valmiki Ramayan, you find Ramo Durnavivas. Sri Ramchandra doesn't indulge in dumb speak. He had promised Sugriv that I will kill Bali. Now it does not matter how he will kill. He kills. Because in direct confrontation, Bali would have never come in front of him. Why would he come? He had no enmity. So how was he going to kill? Now he had, on the one hand, he had promised his wife that I'll protect you. And he also had promised people of Ayodhya that I take your responsibility. And when people of Ayodhya are telling that he is a bad example, Sita is a bad example. So what option he had? Either leave Sita or leave Ayodhya. Well, if he had gone away with Sita, people would have called him a womanizer, henpecked, etc. Well, that's how life goes. You make a choice and you will be criticized for that. Sri Ramchandra's life gives a very simple message. When there is a choice between good and bad, choose good. When you are under pressure, stay true to your dharma. And whenever there is that ethical dilemma, the conflict, listen to your conscience and move ahead. Now, very interesting thing is that uh, Valmiki does not treat Sri Ramchandra as God. Although later literature, particularly Tulsidasa's Ramcharitmanas, treats Sri Ramchandra as God, same with Adhyatma Ramayana and many other Ramayana. So many people have started talking about that this idea of incarnation of God was superimposed. No, it's not really so. Although it's true that Sri Ramchandra is not seen as God. However, we find mention of a few very interesting things in Valmiki Ramayan. Now, if people say that these are interpolations, we have nothing to say, but because there are more than one, so we need to mention. So, most important thing is that, see, the idea of incarnation had not yet evolved as in science. Say, for example, when two scientists went to Einstein and said that atomic bomb can be made from your equations, he said, it's all nonsense. When Big Bang theory was offered to him, he said, your mathematics is good, but your physics is abominable. Now, what happens that in science also ideas evolve, although the seeds, etc., must have been there already. Same with spirituality, certain ideas evolve. Now, idea of incarnation evolve with time. However, that means, what I mean to say that the idea of incarnation as we find in Bhagavatam or a bit in Mahabharata, that is not there in Valmiki's Ramayana. But when we see how Vishnu said that he will come as Rama, but character of Vishnu is different as we understand today and as in Ramayana. We will explain that. And redemption of Ahalya, who had been cursed by his father, by her husband, which is a very important topic in Ramayana. That shows the divine nature of Sri Rama. Then we find that sages adored him. We find Shabari's episode. These things somehow show that the idea had already started taking roots during Valmiki's time, which was later fully utilized by the later poets, particularly by Tulsidas. We find that Sri Ramchandra is both ideal and divine. You find him as an ideal human being, and also you find as divine. So practically, Sri Ramchandra is that bridge to divinity. Bridge to divinity in the sense that, for example, when we have Sri Krishna, we already worship him only as incarnation of God. Now, Sri Krishna as a human being is not really found in the scriptures. But we have a dedicated sacred book in Valmiki's Ramayana where Sri Ramchandra is an ideal character. And yet, later he is also seen as incarnation. He's the bridge where it shows how the ideal and the incarnation meet in one. So, this story was so powerful by Valmiki that slowly it spread. And this whole of Southeast Asia, you'll find there's one more talk given in the playlist. I've given a whole list here. I can just say Kakavin Ramayan, Ram Kavach, Hikayat Sri Rama, etc. Like in Indonesia, even in China, some versions of Ramayana was adopted. And in India, every language, every state, every region has its own Ramayana. So we have Kamba Ramayana here in Bengal, Kritivasi Ramayana, like that. The most interesting thing is Ramayana relevant today? apart from apart for people who are in politics and making use of it, many may question. See, what happens that whether you have, there was this great thinker, Alvin Toffler, wrote a very nice book, The Third Wave, where he talked about agricultural transformation and then technological and then computers, third wave. So whether you have agrarian society, technological society, cyber society, AI society, whatever society, till human beings are human beings, the way we understand, unless we evolve into some other species, our emotions in the form of fear, greed, jealousy, etc., they will remain. Our helplessness, our pain, our joy, they will remain. And these emotions would need proper shaping, for which you need a template, you need an ideal. Not one, in fact, more than one ideals. Ramayana will remain ever relevant. I was just talking to a friend a few days ago and telling, supposing Valmiki had come today, he would be surprised at the changes in the society. Mode of communication, he would be surprised. Things that are happening, the language, from the commitment to marriage, from there to live in relationship, whatever that might mean. And then he would get the shock of his life to see that his Ramayana continues to be there. Brahma had blessed Valmiki with Ram Kratha Katha Pracharishyati. Till these mountains and oceans remain, the story of Rama will remain. Brahma, the Lord of creation, himself had blessed Valmiki. Indeed, Valmiki will be surprised at the changes in the society in various aspects, be it language, be it manners, customs, food, etc. But he will be surprised to see that his work is still adored, admired, and worshipped. Well, so what will happen 5,000 years from now? Same thing. Till this human species, the way we understand, continues to be there, Sri Rama will remain relevant. Ram Katha will continue to be relevant. See, invaders and murderers, they came and they tortured us. We suffered. We made others suffer. But Sri Rama as an ideal remained intact. We stumbled. We fell. We slipped. We went down. Sri Rama remained. Ram Katha remained. And as if the Lord extended his hand, said, get up. I have suffered more than you are suffering. such a big consolation, such a big support. You realize that goodness leads to blessedness. Even when you you suffer, even when you have to suffer, you realize that ultimately it's the goodness. It's the goodness that brings blessedness in life. That is what Sri Rama stands for. To conclude this work, such a bridge from spiritual truth to lived human experience. Parrot like repeating of big words. That's simple. Like, I've seen so many people. One of my young listeners sent me a message. Instead of starting Valmiki Ramayan, you should do practical Vedanta. I became a bit annoyed. I said, enough of this Vedanta thing. Vedanta is meant for chosen few. Unless you are fully established in the values of Ramayana and Mahabharata, shouldn't even listen to the Vedanta. It's beyond you to grasp even the list of it. Talking big, Brahmasmi, nothing less than that. And as a result, what happens? You lose this world and you lose that world too. You lose your very moorings. You have to know, Swamiji also said that at one point he said that I believe more and more in character now. Lived experience is something very important. Talking big is very simple. That is what you find in Sri Rama. And the portrayal by Valmiki, it is not in all white. You find that Sri Rama had, well, his own stumbles. Well, from our standpoint, not from his standpoint. When you suffer, when you have to make choices, he feels so relatable. You can examine your own choices just based on Sri Rama's life. So, anyway, time is up. Just one sentence. I had known of Valmiki Ramayan as a kid, but and I had read Valmiki Ramayan when I was pretty young and loved it. But for our classes, talks here at the university, when I went into a detailed study mode way back in 2007, that means 19 years, 20 years ago, suddenly I realized that, well, this is the book. This is the book to understand how an incarnation of God lives. All the stories that you read in Puranas, Shiv Mahapuran, Srimad Bhagavad, and Durga Sapsati Devi Mahatmya, etc. There, the characters are too overblown. Human qualities are either lost completely or they are kept just as human beings. When you read the biography of Sri Ramakrishna, when you read Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna in whatever language, suddenly you find a complete mismatch between what you have read in the Puranas and what you read in Sri Ramakrishna. So I was so excited that, well, this is how an incarnation lives. And this is such a perfect match between Valmiki Ramayana and Sri Ramakrishna's biography. So I told one of my very good friends, he is now in America, head of a center. So, uh, well, he also laughed and said, well, uh, okay, write an article comparing the two. Of course, I couldn't write the article, but here and there I've spoken about it. And here and there I mention this common link. If you want to understand Sri Rama's character, as in Valmiki Ramayan, you need to know Sri Ramakrishna. And if you want to understand Sri Ramakrishna, you need to have a thorough knowledge of Valmiki's Ramayana. The stories that we get in between the Puranas and Mahabharata, etc., they do not do justice either to the Ramayana or to Sri Ramakrishna. When incarnation comes, as Sri Ramakrishna used to say, he behaves just as an ordinary human being will behave. Sri Ramchandra behaved like an ideal Kshatriya prince. And yet, through that format, through that template, showed how Dharma can be practiced, how blessedness can be achieved, how one can become great. So we will continue with our main text from the next talk. See you at the same time next week. Thank you. Om Shanti Shanti.